back, listeners, to the Inner Peace, Better Health podcast. I'm your host, Sana. And today's episode, listeners, it explores the journey of trauma recovery in adulthood with Kath Essing. She's the author of The Courage to Speak Your Truth. Now, if you have ever felt silenced or weighed down by unspoken pain, this conversation will definitely meet you where you are and gently invite you to rise. So, with that, Kath, welcome to the show, and I'm really, really honored to have you with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, Kath, let's start with your book, "The Courage to Speak Your Truth." Beautiful, powerful title, and in your book, you mentioned that the things we don't say often, they take up the most space inside us. And when we get that opportunity or that channel to share those feelings, though that unspoken pain, it is uncontrollable. So for adults carrying trauma, how can silence become a survival strategy, Kath, and eventually a barrier to healing?
Well, I think in my case, I held on to the secret from myself for a very long time. My memories surfaced in my early 20s. Um, and so there was obviously once it was like a tsunami of emotion that came up from within me. And from there, it was really establishing what to tell people and who to speak to. So there was always a loneliness in curating the story and wondering if what I was going to say would, how hurtful that would be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that the inner peace came from me absolutely being able to share the truth of the story that was within me and be congruent with the story that I was sharing externally to others.
Mm, it's so beautiful. And I really loved the fact that you mentioned that the inner peace came, when you shared your unspoken pain and the trauma, which was like caged within you for such a long time through your book, through your story. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And Kath, also, um, as a woman, yeah, I might be fortunate enough to be a part of this platform to share my story or some of the moments or phases from my life. But I'm very sure many of us, we don't get that opportunity. We don't get. And we have to tame that, or just cage in that trauma or that pain that, we have suffered. And and we have been silenced. So you have developed a framework for speaking truth. What are some of the first internal shifts someone needs to make before they can voice what has been buried? Because it can be really, really, really difficult, really tough to share.
It can, and look, there's people that carry stories with them their whole lives, and there's people that are in relationships that are being silenced, or they're in a workplace that's been keeping them silent. So, um, I one of the things that I've developed is the concept of shifting the narrative. So, um, what I believe is there's three types of stories that dictate our experience. The first type of story is our inner story, it's our personal story, and that's where our beliefs fit. So this is where if we start to really understand what that story is and start to potentially wrestle with it a little bit. So we might have had some childhood trauma where we've decided um, we're not enough or we're a terrible child, and that same voice might come up when we're an adult. So we've got to do some work to wrestle with that and decide where it came from and whether we want to abide by it moving forward.
Mhm.
One of the tools that I've used in my own healing is writing. So I think once we start to write to letters to ourselves or in a journal, and just to get really clear on, where some of these beliefs might have come from, and start to disagree with them. And this is where the healing begins. And this is where that inner peace can be within reach if we start to really be a witness to our own experience and what those stories are. Because these stories are what lead to the second type of stories, which is the way in which we project ourselves to the world. And when there's a misalignment between those two, then it's very difficult for peace to show up. So, it's only then that we can argue with what our societal kind of stories are telling us, and can't argue against all of those. Women around the world are having a hard time doing that, but we can at least be congruent with our own way of thinking and what we're expressing, and there's peace in that.
Mm. But really, really, I think it's such a practical approach to this. And in your own healing, Kath, what role did your body and nervous system play in helping you distinguish between safety and old survival patterns? Because sometimes, uh, although mentally or within our minds, we may try to resist that, but then our body can sometimes give signals in a much different, unexpected ways.
Well, it's a great question, and it's a really difficult concept to make sense of because, as a trauma survivor, as a child, many people disassociate from the events in which they are experiencing. So our body holds one part of the memory, and our mind might hold another part of the memory. So for me, depression in my 20s was how it showed up initially, um, and I got very physically sick before my mind understood what was happening, and it tends to still happen now. I might get sick if I'm not listening to my body's cues. And so when I do get sick, I then recognize that, okay, there's something in misalignment here and I need to stop and I need to take a breath and listen and stop distracting myself from the messages that are coming from within.
Hmm. Yeah, that is hard. That is hard. Because I'm really curious how physical body can respond or resist. Um, and Kath, also another very, very important aspect in trauma recovery is forgiveness. Mm, Sometimes it can be really tough to forgive ourselves, because others may say that it was your fault that you took that decision, or you were why did you were there in that particular moment, and it happens, it is real. So what's your perspective on forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness, Kath? I mean, is it essential, or can it be harmful if like forced prematurely?
Well, I think absolutely that forgiveness can never be forced. And um, I believe that forgiving oneself is absolutely the first place to start when we're talking about any type of childhood abuse or trauma. It's a very complicated thing to heal from, but it's absolutely never the fault of the child. And it's taken a long time for me to get to that place. And I've worked with lots of people that have had the same struggle. It's harder, I think, to forgive the adults in your life at times, but there's also so much peace in really landing in the position that, in my case, and every case is different, that there was only one person to blame, and that was my abuser. And so that, there's now a lot of peace in all my relationships. And I had to forgive my friends and family for not knowing how to support me in my journey of healing. And that created a huge divide at times between us. And that's part of the motivation why I wrote this book, because I wanted there to be a bridge between survivors and supporters of survivors, so that they could start to understand the journey in a way that would allow them to support their friend or family member with more understanding.
Mm, I completely agree. Absolutely agree with you, Kath. Okay, and I guess this question is really close to my heart, and I really feel this is so important. How can allies, like partners, friends, or therapists, how they can better support survivors? I mean, you have seen the gaps in the system. So, how can they be better support survivors without overshadowing or controlling um, their healing process?
That's a fabulous question. And I think to answer it accurately, firstly, for anyone untrained as a support system, so if you're in a relationship with somebody who is enduring this type of healing, just hold space and be there and be patient. And that's sometimes easier said than done, because it can be very
Mhm.
difficult um, watching someone in pain. But there's a tendency for us to want to fix problems. And at the end of the day, these things take time. And so to be patient and to just suggest that you're there and that you will be there if they need you, um, and ask them what they would like you to do. So I think it's different in all situations, but at the end of the day, often, in my journey, I didn't even know what I wanted. So it was very difficult to language that to my partner or my mom or my sister. I didn't know what I needed from them. So it made it very hard for them to support me. So looking back, I think that just knowing that they were there and that they loved me, that was really the important thing. Um, when it comes to being trauma informed in policing, or if you're a school teacher or a professional, I think that there is a real responsibility in getting more education around how to notice and how to communicate to people that are showing signs that they're really in trouble. And, as a teacher, you're dealing with parents and peers and children. So to learn the skills of understanding trauma and trauma responses, both in adults and children, I think is a really important thing to do.
Right. That's absolutely right. But then what about the system, Kath? I mean, we have often seen where, you know, we have to go through, I mean, all the systematic uh, processes and delays. And then, I mean, I can't explain it in proper words, but you would be able to, you would be able to understand that because uh, in our previous conversations as well, we had talked about how there are still loopholes and gaps in the system. Do you think that it is possible to rectify or will take a long time?
Look, I think in simple terms, the system is broken and it really does favor um, the perpetrators. And so, what I would love to see happen in my lifetime is that victims are given a chance to really be heard and listened to through the process. And, justice should be served for all if that is something that they're really striving for. And there should be better opportunities for that to happen. So I really believe that it's about educating our whole community and catching the signs early for some of these victims so that we can start the process. Because the earlier that people are able to go to police, the more likely the opportunity for the perpetrator to be found guilty. I don't know, it's a really complicated Yeah, this scenario, because there's just such an imbalance, and I don't want to seem angry about that, but it's really hard not to just have your heart broken a little bit more each time you see um, another scenario where a woman's life's been taken and there hasn't really been the justice that they deserve. So I guess I want to see that as a society, and I guess this leads into the third story that I was referring to earlier, that as a society, what stories are we telling our young children, our boys and our girls? What story are these cases showing boys what they can get away with and girls what they need to fear? So until we start to create change in the conversation with our children, then as a society, we're just bringing up a generation of the same type of people. And I think we all deserve better than that.
I think this is really uh, on a much realistic ground because we are part of this society, and I think the change has to be done at a very basic, grassroots level. I mean, yes, the change. I'm still bullish about the change being done in the system, justice or police. However, I cannot expect it to happen overnight. But then, what I can do is I can make those changes happen at my end, at the society level. What kind of, as you mentioned, what kind of conversations we are having with children, with a boy or a girl, because somewhere down the line, it's all about the upbringing, the environment we grow in, the people we blend within, our family, our friends, our neighborhood, our schools, the communities. So that's a really, really great point you made, Kath.
And I think, we can't control everything, but that's a good place to start. And
Yeah.
the the way in which we nurture our um, and communicate to our children in, the societal messaging through movies and TV and online.
Mm.
Like, these are powerful messages now that parents can't necessarily override. So it's important that, for us to have consciousness of our personal stories and then what we are projecting to the world, and then also what the world is programming in us. So once we align those three type of stories, I really believe that's where inner peace can reside.
Great, Kath. And if our listeners would like to connect with you and get a hold of your book as well, they would like to share their stories as well with you, what's the best way to do that?
If they go to my website, www.bespeak.au, then all the information and handles for my socials are on there. And my book's available on Amazon. So it's called The Courage to Speak Your Truth, Shifting the Narrative on Childhood Sexual Abuse.
Right. I'll make sure to have the link mentioned in the show notes and details in there. And Kath, I couldn't thank you more for sharing your story and helping us to understand this at such a deeper level. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for this conversation.
I always love talking to you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Kath. And to all the listeners, thank you so much for tuning in on Inner Peace, Better Health. If the insights shared by Kath and her story stirred something within you, let it be a beginning, not a wait. And remember that healing doesn't demand perfection, it demands only presence, awareness. Until next time, stay grounded, speak gently, and take a good care of yourself. Thank you.
Thank you.